I keep saying to them, your father's name's William Robertson, and his father's name's William Robertson, and his mother's name was Maria Stewart, and her father's name was William Stewart, and his mother was old Maria McPhee, and her father was such and such a... And I keep doing that all the time, so they'll know at least who the people are.
At the beginning it was skins, and there were no canvas, just animal skins, pieced together to make a shelter from the wind as much as possible. And then later on came the barricade, which was just a barricade against the cold winter winds, which was one big room, just one big solid room, and a fire in the centre. There was a place for cooking on the fire and a place for sleeping. And if there were a mixed family in the tent, they hung up a kind of sheet where the young women could, probably a young man could probably change themselves, but probably most changing was done outside in the woods. And in good weather, all the eating was done outside and cooked in an outside fire. It was constructed just like an upturned boat, that the wind would just blow over the top, and there was nothing left for the wind to catch.
Say they were warm and they were watertight, and that some of them had a good cover. I mean, just like a round thing in the middle, you know, and the chimney goes up, and they've a tent each side of it. They call that a barricade. It's always dry, the ground with the stove inside. You know?
Every camp was open at the front, and they made them in a big ring, and they put the fire in the centre. Oh, there could be up to 8, 9 at a time, you know what I mean?
9 or 10 families.
Maybe 9 or 10 families. And after they had their meals and that, it was naturally, they all gathered around the one big fire. No one got a chance of keeping the fire going.
Oh, big monster fire, big monster with blocks and sticks and stabs, and big monster fire blazing up every night.
Every night. This is only past time the hand.
Maybe they sit up to maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning to hear the birds
in the morning,
Aye.
making tea, having a drink, and some of the old women came and baking for the morning.
Baking scones, baking bonnets.
When I was a child, we used to camp in the old road of Lunfannon. And to me, it was the best days of my life. There was a joy that I never ever felt in any other place. It was a place where you were close with your people, and there was a spirit of unity and love. When we lived in a city during the winters, there was a different atmosphere. My mother never liked living in a house. You longed for the days when you'd be off the school and going away with the horse and cart, away to the old road. And the old road always seemed to welcome you. Because in the old road, there was no prejudice. You didn't feel the same bitterness towards the Scaldy folk, and you wouldn't get called Tinky and these names. There was companionship with the country boys and girls. You had companionship with your fellow travelling children. You enjoyed going for sticks, you enjoyed fishing, and there was a freeness that you never seemed to experience within the city. When I was a child, we lived in very poor circumstances. We didn't have no wireless. There was no television in the 90s. We sometimes got the pictures if I was lucky. But normally what would happen is, Mother used to sit and tell us stories every night. And my granddad bedways, and he was an old man. And he sat and told us stories all the time, you can. We all used to sit and just tell each other stories that we knew and heard and kent. And it was just a case where your repertoire built up all the time. Same as my wee bairns could sit and tell you hundreds of stories out of the blue. You can. And it used to be fun. All the travellers used to sit in a circle, and the bairns just sat very quietly and you listened. My mother was the same. My mother could look for her living when she was a wee lassie. My sister Aina could look for her living when she was a wee lassie. It's just the way the traveller was brought up. Traveller women never depended on a man. My mother never needed my father to make her living. And it's the same with these lassies will know, and they didn't depend on a man. They love their men, do everything for them. They manage very well with their own resources. but some of them was more worldly. The worldly ones give a very materialistic training. And usually when they grew up, they became successful men at their trade, but they didn't have the deeper wisdoms. I think why I was brought up, I was inheriting wisdom. Other fellas my age will have good big flashy cars and good businesses, but they've no inner kindliness. They can't appreciate beauty. So in a way they lost. So you needed a spiritual training and you needed a physical training. And one was as important as the other.
In these days, landowners didn't bother the travelling people who could stay. I mean, even me, at my present moment today, if I left here, I couldn't even get a chance to construct my tent in no other place from here. Every little piece of land you see in Scotland is a big country. Every little piece of land belonged to somebody. And they just don't want tents on their land. No way. We used to have plenty of camping places where landowners owned it was an old right-of-way or an old road or something that wasn't in use for anything else, an old quarry or something. They didn't bother, you know. They didn't bother about people being on their land because the land was no use for nothing anyway. It was just some derelict place that wasn't used, maybe a wood or something, and these people could stay there at their heart's content. But with the passing of years and progress, and the young generation coming up, they just didn't want nothing to do with the travelling people.
We had a great strong prejudice against us. I don't understand which makes people grow up with prejudices, but it's just something sometimes you're brought up with, and you think it's right that you should think ill of other people. During the war, the people all united, and the travelling people became part of the society. But once the war was finished, they looked for something to hold their aggressions against for the war. So the travelling people were one of the small groups that got picked upon, because when I was a boy I used to get stones thrown at me and called every kind of names under the sun, and you got beaten up nearly every day at school. So you didn't get much of a chance, and your schooling system was awful. You went to school and what you got was put outside to pick up papers. You weren't allowed to be taught anything. And I had a book for many years, and this book said, sing, mother, can sing, Pat can sing, we'll all have tea. And you could imagine how frustrating it was. I used to read this book at school, and I used to come home and read the classics. So it was so silly, and people just looked upon you as a fool. But the moment you went out to the country, a great depth of freedom would sweep through your soul. You could smell the various elements of nature, and you blended in with nature. You became part of something that was wonderful, and you were part of something where the people loved you. You had a sense of belonging, and country people don't have the silly prejudices that city dwellers have. So in the country you were free, the country people were very kindly and sociable, and it was such a pleasure. It was an escapism. And there was nothing finer than sitting at night and to hear some of these great and wonderful tales. There were tales that gave you encouragement. There were tales that lifted you up to the depths of despair and sort of put you up in a high rock where you could get a better view of life and realize that all people were not like those people that dwelt in the city. That there was wonderful and kind people.
Everybody among the travelling people likes the tent. It doesn't matter. I suppose they stay in caravans, I suppose they stay in houses. They like a tent. It's not exactly that a tent is more comfortable, it's the feeling of freedom and spirit that's in the tent, the atmosphere within the tent. That there's something in their blood that draws them back to the tent. And they enjoy sitting in the tent, round the fire, sitting in the tent. Doesn't matter. I've seen them with caravans costing up to £15,000–20,000, and that caravan is locked up and the key put by it, and they built a tent beside it. And they entertain their guests in the tent round the fire, and they could sit and be natural. But being in a caravan at cost others a price, you can't be natural, because you're afraid to let a kid drop a crumb of bread, and you're afraid to let people sit and drop some fag ash in a carpet costing thousands of pounds, you know. In a tent you are so primitive and just natural that you can be yourself.
I'm an architect, and I find the culture of the travelling folk a strong influence on how I think about my work. I've shown old images and recordings of Highland travellers because they're in the public realm, but it'd be a mistake to think that they only inhabit the past. Today there's thought to be maybe 20,000 people whose family of cultural identity sits within the term Scottish Gypsy Traveller, who are now legally recognised as Scotland's only indigenous ethnic minority. As Scotland's settled community, of which I'm part, tries to eradicate the prejudice that came to dominate its relationship with Scotland's nomads, we've much to gain in understanding ourselves as humans and the diverse richness of our culture. Of all the jewels that Scotland's traveller culture carries for us, the greatest is surely this holding of home as a restless thing, something not bound in the ownership of property, but to be made wherever we place ourselves along life's road. We can see the tent as a model of low environmental impact, efficient engineering, tensile architectural design, but their home was not a fixed thing, it was a landscape of belonging, where they renewed their home anew every few days. That's a passion for place, a dedication to dwelling that no fixed house can carry. Those of us who dwell in Scotland all shared this way of being for the 4,000 years before we began farming. If Scotland can find its way to sustaining this inheritance in joy and in respect, then we'll have found at least one part of our pluriverse.
It was mostly hazel. Hazel was a great stick for that, because it's eaten and it was light and you carried. Because some of them had to carry them in their back, or push them in a handcart, or maybe put them in a pony cart.
Big bundles in the backland and the bear sitting at the bundle. Oh, the bear sitting at the top, that's a good as old men, that's right enough. And the women with the bears in their back and a big tartan plaid, kind of big tartan shawl, and the old women.
To me it's a great road, it's a road that I dearly love. It's a road that has played a lot in shaping my character. It's a road for the jacktails became alive. It's a road for I would sit and listen to the old travellers gathered in a circle, and the wee bairns would gather in an outer circle and listen to these old tales, sometimes of the supernatural, sometimes of fairy tales. It could fair enthrall you with their beauty and their grandeur and their tales. And you didn't need any visual aids to ken what they were saying, because Mother Nature was a visual aid to you. Or in a book and environment, there was nothing but beauty. You could see the yellow and the whims and the green ferns and the fir trees and the larches, and it was fairly a time when nature wears her most splendid gown in the summer. And to me, it'll be a beautiful part of my life. And as far as I'm concerned, the travelling folk has never left, because our spirits will aye wander up and down this road. To many folk it might be just an old scabby drove road, but to many it is a way of life.